Hello friends, welcome to our channel. In today's video, we will explore the critical importance of writing test cases. We will also discuss how well-structured test cases can ensure comprehensive testing, improved communication, and how it can enhance the overall quality of the software. So please stay tuned to learn why test cases are essential part of any software development process. So today, before we dive into how to write test cases, let's first break down the basics of product development. At a high level, we have different phases. We start with requirement gathering, then those requirements are analyzed and baselining is done. Based on those baseline requirements, the development starts and the testing is performed. Now, first off, the foremost and the most crucial thing to understand is that the development is happening against the baseline requirements. The scope is defined, and the development team needs to sign off what they have built according to these requirements. Now, what is our role? Now, our job in QA is to ensure that the product is developed as per these requirements. But what's the best way to do that? Simple. Write test cases based on that requirements. Now, what this is going to ensure? Complete coverage, right? Writing test cases based on requirements ensure complete coverage. Since our test cases are mapped to what? Requirements. We can guarantee 100% test coverage. Requirement gives us a clear understanding of what the software is supposed to achieve. By writing test cases based on those requirements, we ensure that all the functionalities and performance criteria are tested. Plus, if a test case is missing, it's very easy to spot, right? Now, next point is communication. In a corporate environment, we work with stakeholders, developers, BA, then we have testers, right? And many other parties who are engaged in the delivery of the product. Requirements act as a common language between all of us. This provides clarity on what needs to be tested, reducing misunderstandings and communication, right? So this communication aspect improves if we follow this approach. Documentation is the next thing. After writing test cases, the next step is executing them. This gives us a valuable information to track the progress and coverage. It also becomes part of the project documentation for future reference, making it easier to look back and understand what was done, right? Now let's look at planning, which is very interesting. uh, you know if you have appeared for interviews, there's one common question that everybody likes to ask: if you have less time and too many test cases, how will you manage testing? Think about it. With test cases and requirements in hand, we can prioritize. Not all modules are of the same priority, right? If you are testing an application, you might have 100 modules, out of which not 100 are of critical priority. So high priority test cases come first, and then the other follows. Test cases derived from the requirements are more relevant and focused on validating the application's intended functionalities, which in turn is reducing any, which is preventing any redundancy, right? I hope that makes sense. And now let's talk about the most important aspect, which is accountability. It's very crucial in any project, any aspect of the life, right? So for accountability, in managing this accountability, our test cases play a big role here. Why? By documenting our test cases and their execution results, we create a clear record of what has been tested and what still needs attention. And why it matters? Tracking progress. With well-documented test cases, we can easily track which parts of the application have been tested and which haven't. This helps us in understanding the current state of the project. Next thing is execution details. By recording the details of each test case execution, including the results and any issue encountered, we provide a clear trail that can be followed upon. Improving what? Processes. Reviewing the documentation allow us to identify patterns and area for improvements in our testing process. This continuous feedback loop enhances the overall quality of the work. By keeping detailed documentation, we not only ensure that nothing is overlooked, but also enhance accountability across the board. Everyone knows what has been done, what needs to be done, and who is responsible for each task. So let's summarize, what we have just talked about. To sum it up, requirements help us identifying critical functionalities that need to be thoroughly tested. We can prioritize test cases based on importance and complexity of the requirements, ensuring high-risk areas are tested first. Knowing the most crucial requirement has help us allocate resources efficiently, focusing on what matters most for the software success. I hope it is helpful. And now let's move to the next slide. What is traceability? I think we have talked a lot about mapping of test cases and requirements. So a more accurate word for the same is traceability, or what a more official word is traceability. So this entire mapping thing is called traceability. I have already explained it in detail in previous slide, so I feel you are very clear on what traceability is. In case you need more details, please leave a comment and I'll try to explain it further. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, now we know why we have to write test cases. We know what is traceability. Now the next important thing that comes into picture is keeping our test suites up to date. Why we have to do that? Because it is crucial for accuracy and relevance of the test, ensuring that they are always aligned with the current state of the application and the requirements. Let's talk about few instances where we need to do that after new or change in requirement. Example can be a new feature added to e-commerce application that allows user to save item for later purchases. We need to add the test case. Any changes in the requirement, we need to update the test case. Post release or deployment. You deployed something, you found some issues, you got some feedback which might require a change in the requirement. We have to update the test case. There is a bug reported which was not covered against any test cases. We need to add a new test case for that. And that might happen before release also. While you are doing regular testing and you find some bug which is not against a test case, we need to add that test case, which is very important, right? If the bandwidth is there, you can afford it, always do a periodical maintenance of the test cases. That essentially means remove any outdated test cases and add the new ones. That's something we should be doing, right? Apart from that, for example, I know it comes under a new feature, but just to give you another example is when we are integrating with a third-party application. There is a new integration. Let's say you have added a new payment gateway with the Stripe or Razorpay. So we have to write test cases around that, and we have to be cautious about what is in scope and what is not in scope. We will cover that later, right? I think uh, so. These are multiple, situations where we have to, add or update the test cases. So if we have to summarize, uh, what we get is accuracy, which ensures that the test cases accurately reflect the current state of the application. Our comprehensive test coverage is maintained. Efficiency of running into outdated or irrelevant test cases is also taken care of, and what it will give us, overall enhanced quality of the product. I think that will be all for this slide, and let's move to the next one. Okay, from my experience of working with multiple clients, I have seen different test case templates, and today what I'm going to talk about, the most commonly found components in, across the test case I have seen so far. So let's start with each one of them one by one. So the first component which is important is test case ID, which is essentially a unique identifier of that test case. Test description is a brief summary of what the test case is about or what the requirement is. Then the next thing is precondition. This is very critical. Why I'm saying it is critical? Because when you're writing a test case, you should be very sure of what the scope of the test case is, what you are intending to test in that particular test case. Why I'm saying that is because at times, people write the complete steps in the test case itself, which is not a correct approach. Because if test fails in a step where you are setting up something which is not even part of the requirement, then you are doing something wrong, right? For example, if I have to test a payment gateway, I won't write, you go and set up Razor Pay in my test steps. It should be part of the prerequisite, right? So anything which is not in scope of the test case or which needs to be there in order to facilitate your execution, needs to go into the precondition or prerequisite part. Then the test steps are essentially the steps that you need to perform for testing that particular test case. Expected result is something which is expected after the execution happens, right? That is kind of a validation. Okay, you did something and the results are as per the expectations. So now, if expected results are not matching with, and then the actual results is essentially what actually happened. And based on this expected and actual, the status comes into picture. What is status? Whether the test case passed, whether the test case failed, whether the test case was blocked because of some other test case failing. For example, you have five things to test, but if the first thing is not working, you cannot test the rest four of them. So that test case will be blocked by the other test case, right? There will be scenarios where you might come up with the status which says pass with exceptions, right? Which is self-explanatory. Now, the next thing is test data, why it is important for, backtracking or for giving evidence. It's more of test artifacts. So where it will be helpful? Okay, your test case is fail. Now what you do? You report a bug. While you report a bug, you need test data. You need to provide test data. Okay, this is something I tested and this is what happened, right? Executed by, you have to put your name, like, it always give credibility and accountability of, whatever somebody is working on. And priority, right? What is the priority of the test case? We should maintain that because it helps us in the long run. Okay, now let's look one of the examples here, right? So test case ID, this is just for reference. It can be TC001, it can be anything you wish to do, right? It can be like initials of your product and then with the number. The whole idea is to keep it unique, right? The second thing is test description. So if you look at this, verify login functionality with valid credentials. This is a very precise requirement which says, we just need to test the valid or positive test case here. Precondition, as I talked about it earlier, you need a test data setup already done. That is not in scope of this particular test case. We just need to check that we have a set of credentials which are valid. So setting up the credential is not in the scope of this test case. The application running should not be part of this test case. Just think about it. If I write these 2 points in test steps, and this registration is not working, you have to fail this test case. But what is this test case is all about? It is more about verifying the login functionality with valid credentials. So this is not in scope. That is why it is in precondition. I think it's more clear now. Look at the test steps, navigate to the login page, enter valid username and password, click on the login button, right? These are the actions you have to perform. What is the expected result? Two things. You should be logged in and redirected, right? So this is very important. Now, based on the comparison, you will mark it as, what actually happened, whether this expected result happened or not. You will mention it here. Based on that, you will update the status, and then you will essentially put test data or comments. Why it is important? So, when you are testing something, if you also mention test data, it's always helpful while reporting the defects, while debugging the issues. And for example, you have, ran test cases on 5 builds, you will always know, okay, what test data I used to test in the last build, and you will always have a historical data to go back and look at. Now let's move to the next slide where we are going to have a look at the template that you can use it and will be available for free to download as well. So what you see on your screen is a sample test case template that I use for one of my clients. So let's focus on this table first. So if you look at this table, the first column is test case ID. As I told you, it's like a generic unique ID for which is going to be unique for each of the test cases. The second column is requirement ID. It was not in the slide. The reason for putting it here is to maintain traceability. If we can have requirement IDs right into the test case template, we will be easily able to make a traceability matrix and things like that. We will cover that later. Test description. It's a brief about the requirement that you are testing. This test is covering essentially prerequisite, something which is not in the scope of the test, but it is required for setting up test data. Input actions is the steps that you need to perform. Expected results is the expected outcome. Based on these steps, you will update what the actual results are and check it against the expected results. If these are in order, based on that, you're going to mark the test case as pass, fail, pass with exception, blocked, out of scope, and more status is more anything else feel is important to include here. Test data is also important to include just for debugging purposes. So this is the test case, the core test case template that we talked about. Let me quickly walk you through this template, and I'll put the link in the description, and you can always download it and use it, for your projects. So this overall template contains multiple tabs. The first tab that you see here is revision history. So essentially, it's here for the reason like whenever you are updating your test cases, getting the test cases reviewed, baselining the test cases, you should put an entry here. Without an entry here, no changes to the test cases should be made. I'm not talking about executions, only maintenance of test cases. Getting test cases reviewed, adding test cases, changing test cases. Execution we don't need to put here. Referred documents is like when you write test cases, you have a lot of requirement documents. They may be technical specs, they may be UI things. So put a reference here along with the version because when this version changes, your test case needs to be updated. It's always good to put a browser compatibility matrix or what is your browser compatibility matrix or your application supports so people know what they are testing, how they are what applications, what platforms this application need to be tested on. Then coverage, this is essentially a pivot table that we have put in place. So what it will do is it will give you a quick view of how many test cases against each requirements are there. On the test case template itself, what we have done is we have given a graphical view based on your executions here. Automatically, the graph will get updated, the count will get updated, right? And there are three fields that we have put in place which are important. So when you execute this test case and provide it as an execution of any build or anything, make sure to include the date, your name, and the version on which you have tested, right? So this will help you to, this template you can use to use for any projects you are working on, and it will give you a very nice graphical view, a tabular view, counts and everything automatically. There are some guidelines that we have put in place to use this template. Feel free to use it. I'm looking forward to any comments that you might have, any questions that you might have. Please leave it in comments and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.